Hello, welcome back to Pre-Primary Sources. I'm Liz Nolasco, and I'm here today with Emily Clark. Wait, this is where I'm going to pause now.
That's okay.
Hi, I'm Liz Nolasco. I'm here today with Em Clark, who is the founder of Liberating Childhood, which is an online project that offers research availability to all early educators. I wonder if you can elaborate a little bit and introduce yourself here.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Liz. Liberating Childhood is like my newest thought baby that I love seeing come to fruition because I've really been passionate, and I think you have as well, about research and research access. And it never made any sense to me why, we spend all this time creating research and then the people who actually need it can't access it to read it, or it costs $30 to download an article for 48 hours. So, Liberating Childhood is about using research in a really open access, equitable way to help do the transformative work in early childhood that we need, while also making a space where people can search for research. They can read research breakdowns and posts by other authors or researchers as well. So, it's really the beginning of a very cool community, I think.
Yes, the research collections that you have featured have been really exciting to read through.
Yes. Yeah. I love sort of getting to see the behind the scenes of someone's thinking who loves to think about the things I love to think about. So that's been a really cool feature.
Yeah, and I think I found it by just Googling Liberating Childhood. Is it liberatingchildhood.org? Is that right?
.org. Yep. Yeah.
Okay. Perfect. So yeah, Emma's here today to talk about really how practitioners can incorporate research, right? How some tips for reading research for
Mhm.
someone who's just starting. So what would you tell someone who is interested and excited and has not done it before? What should they be looking for? How do they start?
Yeah. I mean, I think starting is by like deciding that research is for you. I think so often, like people have been told it's just for academics or like it's too complicated, and it's really not. Like there are ways to break down what's happening there, and there are terms that you need to know and terms that you really don't. So I think that's sort of the first step, is deciding like, yeah, no, this is for me. I am incredibly capable of reading and thinking and doing this work, and that's all research is reading and thinking collaboratively, collectively. So I think that's a great place to start, is just sort of by stepping into that. Because early childhood educators are brilliant, they're very capable. So I think that's a great space. And then really just thinking about what interests you. Like, what are you curious about? What do you want to know more about? Because, as you know, you can find research on anything under the sun. So,
Right.
narrowing it down to like, what are you really passionate about? What are you looking for new ideas on? That can be a really great place to start too.
I love that. I love your goal of accessibility. I mean, even with a fair amount of experience reading research, there have been times that I've looked into, like I was reading about music and the brain recently, right?
Mhm.
And I had papers open in one tab and a dictionary open in the other because I was a neuroscience and that was so outside of my expertise that I needed to look up about every third word for a few
Mhm.
paragraphs. And there's no shame in doing that, right? It's learning, it's growing, and it's following your interests.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that like that happens to everyone. Like that happens to me when I read a paper I've written. With a colleague, I had a paper where we worked on a big national data set, and she did some absolutely incredible statistical analyses. And reading back like her descriptions of what she did, I was like, I have no idea. I'm so glad you
Right.
can do this work. And I'm so glad to talk to people about what it means, but what that specific sentence means and all of its parts, I'm going to leave it to you.
Yes. Yes, it's inherently collaborative.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. There's no shame in that.
I love that. And then on your collections page, you have a line that says, "These collections are not neutral. They carry histories, arguments, and responsibilities." And I wonder if you can elaborate a little bit on that. In the first episode, we talked some about the institution of science as historically gatekeeping and, in some ways continuing.
Mhm.
And I wonder if you can sort of elaborate on how you read things and interpret now
Yeah, I
with
mean,
that
I think
knowledge.
that is sort of the history or whatever of academia or science has been very exclusionary, and has been like the way that we choose to define science determines who gets to be involved in it, right? And so that's an inherently sort of powerful thing to be doing. And the way that science and research have been defined, for decades at least, if not hundreds of years, has been about, a very quantitative approach, thinking about numbers and facts and proving things. And now I think, thankfully, there's been a shift that science is and can be so much more than that. And that having numbers in your paper doesn't excuse you from the responsibility of owning your own biases, of being responsible to your work. I think it's easier for people to say, "Oh, well, this is a statistic, right? It's a really easy soundbite to repeat, so there must be no harm or no bias in it." But all research is biased because it's performed by human beings, and human beings are naturally biased in our own ways. And so I think my work is about owning the fact that the research I talk about is inherently political, is driven towards the goals of creating humanizing spaces in early childhood, and that I'm continually working on my own biases and my own learning in that way, rather than I think just trying to ignore them and carry on.
Yes, absolutely. I saw this highlighted in a paper that I read recently called Of Ladles and Laptops, Exploring Preschool Children's Digital Play, where there
Mm.
was a section called Researcher Positionalities, where, which I don't think I've seen before, where the authors noted that, let's see, as adult white cisgender women and as former early elementary teachers who have come to the classroom to observe the playful engagements of diverse children in the preschool context, we were never afforded a full insider perspective, right? So this idea that they are aware of, their own positioning and that they are observing, they're not enmeshed in it every single day. And I feel like that acknowledgement of their own placement was really, um, unique. Like I said, I haven't seen it frequently, if at all.
Mm.
And it's valuable for the reader too, to just keep that in
Yeah.
mind.
Yeah, it's coming up more and more, this idea that researchers need to be accountable for who they are in that space and who they are in their work. I think we used to have the idea that your research was just something completely separate from you, even though you did it and you wrote it and you created it. And for me, I'm like, I always feel like I'm giving birth to these research babies whenever I publish something. And so it is categorically, my work is always going to be made up of me. And so being clear with readers of like, this is important to me. I do care about this. Here's how this shows up here. And here's how I've made sure that what shows up here is reflective of the people involved and not just me. But, I think I do take that role seriously of that accountability for the work that we do.
Right. And I think it's an issue of both. We all have our own blind spots, right?
Mhm.
And even when there have historically been people who are looking for reasons to denigrate others through what they call research.
Mhm.
And we all have our own biases and blind spots and things that we're just not aware of while we're doing our observations and our writing. And it's so hard, right? Because the words that you use have so many different connotations.
Yes.
And I think, working in English specifically, there's a lot of subtlety and gradation in various words that we
Mhm.
use. And
Yeah.
so being conscious of what word we're choosing and why that is what feels right in a lot of ways can really make a huge difference in what we're saying and how it's being interpreted.
And I also think, sharing your writing, sharing your thinking, with a wider group of people can make a big difference. If everyone you're sharing with has the same ideas as you, looks the same as you, thinks the same as you, you're going to get some feedback, but it's also good to get feedback from people who are very different than you or take a very different approach. And so I enjoy that kind of intellectual argument as well, which I think is becoming a bit of a lost art these days.
No, I am fully on your side. I kind of refer to my process for the podcast as the grouchy ladybug style because the first thing I do is look up someone who is completely whose beliefs or research is completely counter to what I believe something
Mhm.
is, right? So I just
Yeah.
start it with, "Hey, you want to fight?" and go from there.
But I love that. And I think that's such a an underrated skill. And I think that's what we need to be doing. Like, I want other people to be advocating for young children in different ways. Like, I know what I bring to the table, and I have a very different skill set than someone else who's bringing those their skills to the table. Like, we all need to be at the table. And it's okay if we decide, like, this looks different, or I care about this aspect of it and not that aspect of it. We all need to show up. And so I think having those conversations, building those bridges, understanding like what is similar in our work and what are the areas where we are inevitably going to disagree. But I think if we share that mission for humanizing children, like for me, that's my non-negotiable, right? Like we have a
Yes.
lot of different ways and ideas about how to do that. But for me, that's the non-negotiable in my work.
Right. I think that's so important to remember because when we're looking at these discrete, like a research paper is so focused and so specific.
Mhm.
When we're looking at these discrete areas, right? If you're reading about fine motor development or cognitive development, some aspect of cognitive development, right? Keeping in mind that this is about people.
Yes.
And it's not just about blindly developing this skill in total isolation, right? The brain in the jar problem.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the big areas that like I push back a lot in my work is on the idea of development and developmental theories. And I was listening to your episode with Heather earlier, and you and she were talking a little bit about ideas of sequences of children's development and how it's humans just aren't that rigid. And I think sometimes in
Mhm.
early childhood for practitioners, we get a theory that like Piaget or Vygotsky, and there's sort of like one piece of it is taken and used as, um, the canon forever
Right.
without considering sometimes how that might be disenfranchising young children or how that might be limiting what we think about their capabilities and their humanity sort of as they already are.
Can you talk more about that? I'm very interested in this idea of
Yeah. So
these
I think
established trajectories being limiting.
I think that often we limit what we think children are capable of or what they can do. And so we don't provide opportunities that meet them both like where they are while also believing in them. I think it's so often we look at children in early childhood and we see what they're not. We see what they're not yet, what they're not doing, where we need to improve them, where they need to
Mhm.
develop more, where they're developmentally behind. And that all just kind of wraps around in our brain into creating spaces where everyone needs to be constantly improving and actually, that feels so terrible. Like as a
Yeah.
human, I don't want to feel like I need to be constantly improved upon. I mean, I do because that's a part of my journey, but like I don't no one wants that. You want to be able to sit at home at the end of the day and feel like you're loved for who you are. So I think a lot of the developmentally kind of work can go into that you're not human yet or you're not good enough yet, that really
Hmm.
blocks us from seeing children as human and whole as they are already.
Absolutely. I want to say, as we are talking, I think the first one that came to mind was part and stages of play. I feel like
Hmm.
that is so frequently used to really limit what children are exposed to. This idea that, oh, well, they're only in solitary or parallel play. And
Right.
so we can't expect them to, so we stop looking for the
Yes.
cooperative play. We stop looking for those interactions, I think, sometimes until they hit that threshold in our head of, oh, they're three now. Now they can engage with other people.
Right. Magically, at this, however many days of being passed out of the womb, you are
Right.
now capable of this. Yeah. And I think it's not to say that there are no good ideas in developmental theory. But again, it's that critical eye that we have to take when we read all research, whether that's something brand new or something that's really deeply established. There's always going to be things we want to take and things that we want to reject. And I think that's part of the process. That's not a flaw. That's a
Right.
part of this kind of work.
Absolutely. Yeah. It feels like a very long spanning conversation across, generations and decades and centuries now, right? We've got
Yeah.
200-year-old research that we're leaning on in some occasions, or certainly philosophies.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting to hear those different perspectives. And also starting with when you're starting with the disagreement or when you're bringing in those disagreements. I think there's this idea kind of in the zeitgeist that's you can find research to back up anything. And so I
Hmm.
sort of want to talk about cherry picking research and what that is and isn't, because I think that can kind of get thrown around without consideration, or it's really easy to do it by yourself. Like there's a reason I start with the opposing idea because I know that my inclination as a human is to find people that agree with me all the time
Right,
because I'm
right.
right.
Yeah, I think that's huge. And I think for me, like when I think about this idea of cherry picking or like taking that one statistic, whatever it is, this one piece of research, for me, it's never about just one. And I think
Mhm.
that's the big takeaway is like reading research, engaging with these arguments and theories. It's a continual process. So, like, you're never going to have as informed of an opinion reading one piece as you are if you'd read three, because you're going to see nuance in that, even if you're looking at different people's opinions, different people's strategies, whatever. So I think that's a piece of it is like, it's not a one and done situation. Just like learning with young
Right.
children, we're never done. Like it's sort of an ongoing process. So I think that helps. And then I always like to like you do explicitly sort of question myself while I'm reading, like what do I have a reaction to? And then what's underneath that reaction? Like why might I be feeling that way? Um, because that can be really important. But yeah, I think that's one of the things I am very aware of when I'm like translating people's research for the research library is how do I make this more accessible while also staying true to its findings? And like, I'm really excited about these findings, but I also want people to know like, these are the limitations. Like, these are things that we've noted that, you need to take into consideration too when you share this idea.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's so much value in um, knowing that you need to get different perspectives, right?
Mhm.
Citing one paper is citing one paper. Citing three papers, you've had time to really percolate and sit with your thoughts and their thoughts and see what as you're reading, even as a non-researcher, right? I can read these and say, oh, I actually have some questions. How are you lumping no screen time in with less than 2 hours of screen time? That's a pretty huge difference if you're measuring, the
Yeah.
impact of screen time. If you're going under 2 hours or over 2 hours, that's not a lot of room for nuance here.
Right, right. Yeah. Yeah, and I think, the tech side of early childhood and early childhood research, that's not my area of expertise at all, but I really like to read around it because it's really interesting to me to see how people are thinking about that and grappling with that. Um, yeah, so I think there's always like room to engage, even if you're like, oh, I don't actually like, I'm not an expert on this. I don't actually know what the right answer is. That's great. And actually, the researchers don't know what the right answer is either. Not just
Right.
for tech, for anything. We're just doing our
Right.
best.
Absolutely. And I think what's amazing about early childhood research as a whole is so many people are so willing to engage. Like, I've had such amazing luck emailing authors to ask for their papers or, you
Yes.
know.
And that's the thing, like researchers also don't want their articles to just sit and do nothing. Like they work really hard on them and it takes, over a year often to get something published, and that's even a short timeline. So it's really a lot of work. And so when people do reach out, they're so happy to hear from people, to hear like, oh, I love your work. Oh, I have a question about this. Can I have the PDF? Like that's probably the top tip. If you can't access a PDF, just email the corresponding author and I can't imagine they would say no. Like I've never
Yeah.
heard of anybody being like no. I did email someone and ask for their dissertation, and they said no because they were still going to publish from it, so it wasn't released yet, and they
Yeah.
wouldn't let me have a copy of it either, which is fair enough.
Right. If there's something else in the works, I guess.
Yeah, but they said it nicely, so that's all you can ask.
Right. Right. There's no harm in asking.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so I do want to respect your time, kind of think maybe one more question for you. So as you were creating, I guess what was the spark? What was the impetus? What made you realize, because you've been an educator, you're an
Mhm.
academic,
Mhm.
they coincide, they overlap. What where did the passion for bridging research and practice in this direct way come from? So, I mean, you serve as an intermediary in some ways in that you're bringing in the research and you're writing these brilliant articles.
Mhm.
But this interest and passion and faith in early childhood educators that a lot of people don't seem to have. Do you have an origin story, or is it just kind of it's always been
Oh.
there?
I mean, the research access really hit for me when I finished my master's degree and I had had such a brilliant experience and I learned so much and I was loving like having access. I could just look anything up. Um, and then I earned my degree and then that was cut off very quickly. And so I felt this immense sense of loss and I felt this like unfairness of that. Um, and that was what sort of drove me to start sharing on social media about research and things like that. As far as always believing in early childhood educators, I mean, I think that's just a non-negotiable for me as well. Like, and I always believe parents want what's best for their children. Like, I just have to go into that. I have to hold on to hope somewhere in this world, and
Right.
it's incredibly challenging. So I find it in early childhood because I think that's just where, when we really have those moments where we're sitting with a young child and like having this fully authentic human moment, like that's unmatched. That's unmistakable. And I want more people to be able to experience that joy because it's fun and fabulous. And also because like that's what high quality care is as well, is being able to be
Mhm.
human in your space with other humans and learning how to do that together in community is a whole journey of itself.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And when you have that access to the research, have that access to those years and years and generations of knowledge, you're able to do it so much more easily than if you're, diving in with these, modern notions of children are to be built on. Children need to be
Mhm.
constantly stimulated and stimulated and stimulated to grow.
Yes, yes, yeah. And so I think it's been really great to see, like to hear from educators who have said, I've been really struggling thinking I was alone. And this has shown me that like other people are thinking about this too. Other people have these questions. And so I think research can be really powerful in that way because a lot of times early childhood educators are really isolated. Working
Mhm.
in a classroom with just children or working in a home child care setting, and you don't necessarily get to talk to a lot of other adults. And if you even work with other adults, you don't have time to talk with them during the day. So I think building these spaces where we can own the fact that we have incredible knowledge to share with the field, and the field has a lot of knowledge to share with us, and build arrangements to make those sort of exchanges of knowledge more visible and easier.
Absolutely. And the idea of an educator being able to really take charge of their own professional development is so huge because there, have historically been such expensive boundaries in the way,
Yeah.
and just ways to access that knowledge. And, sometimes the professional development that your job is offering, if they're offering professional development, is not what you need,
Yes.
right? And who knows what
Yeah.
you need? Who knows what the children in your classroom need better than you?
Yeah. And so I think there's that like measure of like empowering. And I think people find that when they step into the power of sort of resisting some of these poor practices or, just schedules and routines that don't feel good for children or teachers. And they start to see other people are doing this work too. Like that feels so much better. Like, yes, it's still incredibly hard, but it's harder almost like with a shared sense of purpose instead of feeling like you have to do it all alone. And I think that can make a big difference.
Yes. And if I'm not mistaken, I'll cut this out if I am mistaken. Your site has conversation, right? You have a community space for
Yes,
people
we
to discuss
do.
what they're
Yes.
seeing and what they're thinking about.
And I'm
So
like
even if you're
very
doing it in
much
isolation, you're
excited.
not doing it in isolation.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So come and think with us and share with us. I think I'm really looking forward to that aspect of it growing as well.
Yes, definitely. Can you give one last plug where people can find you on socials and your website and all the
Yeah,
things?
people can find me on at Liberating Childhood on Instagram. I just recently started a Facebook that's the same thing. So the content gets posted to Facebook now as well, under Liberating Childhood. And then the research finder and all of the research library tools, etc., can be found at liberatingchildhood.org. So that's a great way to reach out. Find me there.
All right. Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you all for listening. Have a great day.